Yo, what's going on, y'all boys? Welcome back to another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT. Did y'all see that new college football 26 trailer that just dropped? I ain't gonna lie, that thing looking pretty nice. I'm gonna pick the game up when it comes out. And I was gonna give my thoughts on the trailer, but I'm gonna hold off on that until they drop the game breakdown. That's when they go over the new features and the improvements that they made. So when that comes out, I'll give my initial thoughts on the game. But I want to take a few minutes to talk some college football with y'all today. I don't know if you guys paid attention to the cryptic comments that the SEC commissioner made a few days ago, but it has me thinking that we have another wave of conference realignment on the horizon, but this is going to be the big one. The Super League that has been talked about for these last couple of years, college football is equivalent to the AFC, NFC, and the NFL. Well, that's coming faster than what most of us expected. How about Bill Belichick? When he got hired by North Carolina, the big question was, how was he going to adapt going from coaching in the NFL, the college ball? Well, I think the question we should be asking now, with how he's been abusing all of college football's rules, is how is college football going to adapt to Bill Belichick? There's a national title contender that the world has just forgotten about that we'll discuss. Bryce Underwood, I'm not trying to be disrespectful to anybody on Michigan's team right now, but he's the only player on that squad that matters. Miami, how can they finally stop living off the nostalgia of the 90s and the early 2000s? We'll get into that. And I got thoughts on Texas versus Ohio State. Yeah, I know that we still have a few months to go until that game kicks off, but I got some early thoughts on the game. And we're going to talk about how the Longhorn Network broke college football. Smash that like button, subscribe if you're new, turn on post notifications so you don't miss when we drop new content. If you're listening on podcasting platforms, give us a 5-star review if you enjoy. If you're listening on YouTube, go ahead and check us out on all podcasting platforms, Apple, Spotify. The links are down in the description below. And let's dive into it. Conference realignment is not over. We still have a new wave that's just around the corner, but this isn't going to be like the conference realignment of the past when you have a few teams joining a new conference. No, this is going to be the conference realignment that assembles together college football Super League, and it's coming a lot faster than what we initially expected. The SEC commissioner has been popping off as of late. He made some comments where he said, I have people in my room asking, why are we still in the NCAA? And when I saw this pop up, I initially thought, okay, the Super Leagues are coming, and I think we could see this happen as soon as 2027. You already have the SEC plus the Big Ten, the two powerhouses of college football right now, who have heavy influence over this sport at the moment. They have so much influence to the point where they have influenced the new upcoming playoff format. Now, it hasn't been finalized if it's going to be 14 or 16 teams, but the SEC and the Big Ten have been able to push their weight around, and they've gotten everything that they've wanted, and they got a bigger goal in mind outside of just trying to get more money, trying to get more revenue. They have 4 auto bids that they're going to get in the new playoff format. And that is all about control. Because when you control the postseason, you have control over the entirety of the sport. And here's a bigger picture. The SEC and the Big Ten, they are secretly planning an alliance. I heard Brian Kelly during the SEC spring meeting say that his proposal for how schedules should work is that you have your 9-game conference slate, then you play one Big Ten opponent, and then the school has their choice of picking from whoever they want to play in 2 out-of-conference games, not named the Big Ten. So this is similar to how the AFC versus NFC works in the NFL. And at this point, with what George Sankey said in his comments and with what Brian Kelly said with his schedule proposal, I have a lot of belief that college football is planning on breaking away from the NCAA. Because think about it. The NCAA has no control over the sport anymore. They don't have a say in the media rights deals that are negotiated by the conferences. They don't have any control over the transfer portal, and they're outdated when it comes to being able to handle name, image, and likeness, to the point where they have to give the issue to Congress to solve their own problems. And that alone further shows why the SEC and the Big Ten are justified to break away from the NCAA as a whole. And with the amount of control that they already have over the sport, the playoffs has nothing to do with the NCAA. It's not March Madness where the NCAA runs the postseason tournament. That's its own separate entity. And these conferences are their own separate entities also. So when George Sankey or Greg Sankey said that he has people asking, why are they still in the NCAA? It's a very good question. Why are you? The NCAA gives you no benefit. The main reason for the formation of the NCAA was to have every team, every conference under one umbrella, so the guidelines and regulations could be easily implemented. But now, with the NCAA being so incompetent at doing their job, the SEC is justified to just take it into their own hands along with the Big Ten and just say, let's just go ahead and form up the Super League. The SEC and the Big Ten, they're drawing the ratings, the audiences, the revenue. What does the SEC and the Big Ten need the NCAA for at this point when they don't do their job at all? It would be much easier to govern what's going on with the portal and NIL if you just took it into your own hands and you didn't have to worry about the NCAA. You know, they have very weird ways that they go about implementing punishment. Some teams get punished harsher than others for committing the similar offenses. And even when the NCAA does try to issue a punishment, nobody really takes them seriously. They just get sued to death. Now, what's going to happen when we get the formation of these super conferences is that, for one, you probably going to have a lot of lawsuits that happen. The G5 schools are probably going to say, oh, this isn't right. And then they're going to take it to court. They're going to be like, oh, this isn't, good for the competitive balance of the sport. And then you know what the Big Ten, the SEC are going to say? They're either going to give them a few ultimatums. They're going to say, you can sue us and maybe get a little bit of money in exchange, or you can play by our rules where you may have your own separate playoff. You know, that G5 playoff that Josh Pate has proposed that always gets a lot of backlash. Well, that realistically is on the table. And then you're going to have it where if they don't want to go through with having their own playoffs and they do want to have a seat at winning a national championship, the Big Ten and SEC, they might just throw them a bone. They might say, you know what? We will allow one G5 team to get an automatic spot into the playoffs, but they won't be seated higher than 12th. So you'll have a really tough path to winning a national title. And if that's not good enough for them, then guess what? They can say, we're just going to alter the criteria so you don't even have a shot at getting into the playoffs and competing for a national championship. You can just stay a member of the NCAA. And of course, you can say that's unfair. They can take them to court for it. But there is no rule that says that the CFP has to allow G5 schools in. This is an invitational playoff. So if you're not invited, There's nothing you can really do about it. There's no rules that says you gotta have a G5 team in there. And yes, it is unfair. I'm not agreeing with it, but this is ultimately what's going to happen when we have the formation of this Super League. Another fallout from this is that for all of you folks that are so upset that Notre Dame continues to not join the conference, well, your wish is finally going to be granted. When we get this Super League, Notre Dame is going to have no choice but to join the Big Ten. Because at that point, with how big the new media rights deal is going to be, there's too much money that Notre Dame will be leaving on the table just to remain independent. NBC isn't going to have enough money to cut the big enough check that Notre Dame will receive if they were to join the Big Ten in this Super League. And another issue is that if Notre Dame doesn't join the Super League, they want to try to remain independent, then they're just going to be the odd man out. They're just going to say, you know what? You can just die with the rest of the NCAA. You can just stay on a sinking ship. And Notre Dame, they are a team that does have a big fan base. They draw a big amount of ratings. They also have a really large fan base. So I'm pretty confident that they will get membership into the Big Ten. I know that they tried to get membership in the Big Ten in the past and they were denied twice, but this is a lot different. They want Notre Dame to be a part of this. And if Notre Dame still wants to try to finagle their way, still try to come to some sort of agreement, then what's going to happen is they're not going to have an opportunity to get into the playoffs. And then two, they're just going to be left out. They're going to be isolated. The SEC and the Big Ten, they're not cutting no deals. You either join them, you're part of the fight, or you're against the fight, and you side with the NCAA. And it just makes too much sense for Notre Dame to be a part of this. You're either in the club, or you're going to be watching from the parking lot. And then the last repercussion of the formation of College Football Super League is that the ACC is going to implode. They don't want just anybody joining this thing. The Big Ten, the SEC, they're going to snag Miami, FSU, Clemson, North Carolina, Georgia Tech, and then whoever is left from the ACC, once those teams are snatched up, they probably end up just joining the Big 12. The Big 12 is going to be part of this Super League. They're not going to have the same leverage, the same power that the SEC and the Big Ten have, but they're not small enough that you can leave them out. But they're not big enough to the point where you have to give them a large say. They're just lucky to just be there. They're just the fallout of the scraps. The misfits, the smaller programs that nobody really wants. That's how the Big 12 can stay afloat. And they probably just come to an agreement with the merger with the ACC. That just makes a lot of sense. The ACC has no chance in hell of surviving this thing. And the rest of the G5 schools, maybe the Big 12 wants to snag up a Boise State, a Colorado State, or San Diego State. But for the rest of those schools, I really don't know what to say for them. They're just going to be having to hope and pray that these super leagues or this super conference has some mercy on them and they're still able to come to somewhat of an agreement with them. But the Super League is coming, people. And it's coming a lot faster than what a lot of us thought it would. Some were saying that it was 2031, 2035. I really believe with the comments that Greg Sankey just uttered out of his mouth a few days ago, that's kind of foreshadowing that there are already steps being taken behind the scene, that this process is probably going to happen within a year or two from now. When Bill Belichick first got hired by North Carolina, the big question was, how is he going to handle making the transition from coaching in the NFL to coaching 18 and 19-year-olds? Well, with how he's been abusing all of the rules in college football right now, the question we should be asking is, how is college football going to adapt to Bill Belichick? He's treating this thing just like he was the general manager for the New England Patriots for all those decades. He's treating the transfer portal like it's free agency. North Carolina, currently has the third largest portal haul in America right now. They got 41 guys in this portal class. They got the 9th ranked class in the country at the moment. They just landed a huge commitment from former South Carolina QB Gio Lopez, who is probably most likely going to be their starting quarterback this year. They gave him a deal for 2 years, $4 million. So they gave him a pretty good check. And he was really good for South Alabama last year. 16 tutties, only 5 picks. He also was really good running the ball, 7 rushing touchdowns, 565 rushing yards. And he was 30th in QBR last year. And they also got a few big pickups on the offensive line. You know, Bill Belichick loves obsessing over offensive linemen. He got one of the better offensive linemen in the portal, and Daniel King, who is a transfer from Troy. He only allowed 9 sacks in over 1,300 pass blocking snaps over the past 2 years. He was a 2-time All Sun Belt Conference selection. You got another offensive lineman and sitter, Crystal Kelly from Holy Cross. He also started a good amount of games for them. He was a first-team Patriot League selection. And on the defense side of the football, they got former Washington cornerback Thaddeus Dixon, who I'm a big fan of. He started for the Huskies over the past 2 seasons. He registered 16 pass breakups, 2 interceptions. He was the 3rd rated cornerback in the portal cycle, according to 247. And with college football not having any salary cap restrictions, UNC has lowered their academic standards to make it a lot easier for Bill Belichick to get a lot of these talented players. They also are investing more money into him as what they've ever did into this football program. And at this point, Bill Belichick, with the easy schedule that he has, if he is as good as a coach as what we believe him to be, the GOAT, regardless, college football, NFL, there's not a single better head coach than what Bill Belichick is. He is a multiple times Super Bowl champion. He easily should be able to run through this schedule that North Carolina has coming up. I feel like the ceiling for them this year is 11-1, 10-2. The only elite team that they played this year is Clemson. Outside of that, you kick the season off against TCU. You got to go up against your rival, NC State. You should mop the floor with them. I got North Carolina making it to the ACC championship game and possibly getting into the CFP as a 2-loss team. Look, they already said that they want to use ratings somewhat as a criteria for how they evaluate who should get in. Now, of course, that wasn't official that they were going to take potential ratings into account, but let's just be honest. If North Carolina has a shot at getting into the playoffs, the amount of ratings that Bill Belichick would generate if he has a first-round road matchup against Alabama would be off the charts. You think that ESPN would pass up on that? Absolutely not. Now, the floor for North Carolina, I still think is pretty high. I got them at 9-3, worst case scenario. Maybe they do kind of have a slow start out the gate, but they get better as they progress throughout the season. I still believe Bill Belichick is an elite coach. I don't believe that Tom Brady made Bill Belichick what he is, because his first season without Brady, he went to the playoffs with Mac Jones. You know, Bill Belichick just kind of got a little bit outdated in his philosophy when it came to drafting and roster construction. But with him having time off, being able to sit back, reevaluate himself, and also he has his son on the coaching staff who is going to be the head coach in waiting if this experiment goes well. He's probably in his dad's ear saying, hey, Dad, like we got to be a little bit more modern if we're actually going to have a shot winning here. And when you look at Bill Belichick's coaching staff, it's not just a bunch of professional coaches that used to coach in the NFL. It's a good blend of former NFL coaches and a good amount of collegiate coaches as well. So I think having a hybrid of both is going to vote well for this Carolina staff. You're going to have guys that are going to be good at understanding how to coach these players up, because you can't really coach these players now like how you used to. Bill Belichick already understands that. And from listening to his former players like Julian Edelman and Rock Gronkowski talk about his coaching style, he doesn't coach every player the same way. He knows how to coach players in ways to get the best out of them without just being a hard ass on them. I feel this Bill Belichick experiment is going to go well for at least the first season. What happens after year two, we will see. But when you have a portal haul this massive, and you have a school that's investing this amount of money into the football side of things, I expect this to be a pretty successful year one for Bill Belichick down there in Chapel Hill. Oregon won the Big Ten championship last year, and going into this season, they have the third best overall roster when you combine what they're bringing in from the transfer portal and how good they've recruited. I am really surprised that the world has just forgotten about Oregon being a national title contender. They are just as good as Ohio State and Penn State from a talent standpoint. You got Dante Moore taking over from Dylan Gabriel as a starting quarterback, former five-star recruit, started his collegiate career at UCLA playing for Chip Kelly. Things didn't really work out for him. He got benched. And then he ends up hitting the portal last year. He got to sit and learn from Dylan Gabriel. He has been getting developed behind the scenes as well, getting coached up by offensive coordinator Will Stein, who eventually will be a head coach. I don't know when. I thought he would have gotten hired last year. Kenny Dillingham got hired after only one season, so I'm surprised it's taken Will Stein so long to get a head coaching job. But with the talent that Dante Moore has around him, and with his skill set having more upside than Dylan Gabriel, he has a stronger arm, he's a slightly better athlete. I expect him to quickly establish himself as not just one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten, but one of the best QBs in all of college football. There's a reason why he had that 5-star tab on him, and Oregon just doesn't pick up anybody. Normally, when they get guys out of the portal, they're looking for instant contributors. So the fact that Dan Lanning and his staff felt picking up Dante Moore and let him sit for a year would allow him to grow shows you how much they feel about him in terms of his potential, his upside. They feel really good about how well he's going to play this year for the Ducks. And you got Evan Stewart at wide receiver. That's going to help out Dante Moore. He should have his best year yet. He was third in receiving yards behind Tess Johnson and Trayshawn Holden. He was a 5-star coming out of high school. And, I still don't feel like he's lived up to those expectations, but I more so think that was due to him having to share a bunch of targets. He had a really good game against Ohio State when he went for nearly 150 yards. He's really dynamic after the catch. And look out for true freshman wideout, DeCarrion Moore. He could be this year's Jeremiah Smith, elite route running. He has high-end level speed. He should produce a ton of big plays after the catch, just like how Evan Stewart is really good at generating a lot of yak. DeCarrion Moore, we should see him be just as good in that department. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see him start week one. He's that good. And then you got Tulane transfer Mekhi Hughes, who was one of the best running backs in the country last year, ran for 1,400 yards in 2024, 15 touchdowns, was averaging 5 yards per pop. And the year before that, his first season, he had 1,300 yards. So this is not just one of the best running backs in the nation that Oregon is getting, but this is one of the best players in all of college football. So you have a lot of talent on offense, which is why, them having a few losses when it comes to the offensive line to the NFL doesn't hurt them. Anytime somebody brings up returning production for Oregon, I just laugh. When you have Phil Knight's deep pockets to help you get anybody you want out of the portal and recruiting, returning production doesn't mean anything. You lose guys to the NFL and you just buy some more studs elsewhere. It doesn't really matter in this new age of college football when you got the kind of money that they got down there in Eugene. Defensively is where you're hoping you see more improvement. Because on their D-line, they are going to be replacing a lot of cyborgs on that side of the ball, but you still do have your top pass rusher from last year, Mateo Uyunglele, who led the team with 10.5 sacks. Your secondary loses 95% of their production from last year, but they have 18 out of 13 of their highest recruited cornerbacks on this team in program history. So their cornerback room has never been better. Their safety position also is really good. You got Purdue transfer Dylan Thieneman, who was a top 10 player from this past portal cycle. He was a true freshman All-American 2 years ago at Purdue. Last year, he had 70 tackles, 6 pass breakups. He has a knack for not just being a ball hawk, but he also is really good in run support. So he pretty much can do everything. He can guard tight ends. He can guard running backs. He can guard receivers coming out of the slot. And he can come down and lay the hammer down and be a factor in run support. And you got another good transfer from Ole Miss and Jaden Kennedy, who started 11 games for the Rebels in 2024. He can play both the slot and boundary corner. My ceiling for Oregon this year, once again, they go undefeated in regular season play. They don't really have too many tough games that they play outside of Penn State on the road. That's when that could go either way with everything that Penn State brings back. But best case scenario, James Franklin continues to struggle in big games. You got Indiana, which Indiana isn't as talented as what Oregon is, so they'll win that one. They play that at home, and they play USC at home as well. USC could surprise a lot of folks this year, but I still think they're a year away roster-wise from being able to compete with Oregon. So if Oregon ends up playing up to their potential, they once again should go undefeated. But their floor still is incredibly high. 10-2 still gets you into the CFB. And honestly, they got screwed last year. Let's just be honest. You win the Big Ten championship and you get rewarded with playing Ohio State. Yeah, I don't really think that was a good reward. If they would have lost the Big Ten championship, they would have been better served doing that. Because look who Penn State got the benefit of losing the Big Ten championship. You got a home game against SMU. You got to play Boise State, who somehow got a bye. They're the main reason why they changed the seeding. Oregon this year has the talent, they got the coaching, and they got the schedule to once again be in position to win the national championship. And we ask ourselves every year, when is it going to be the year that Dan Lanning finally breaks through and Oregon finally gets a national title? They're not really a blue blood program per se, but ever since I got into watching college football, 2009, 2010, they've always been a top 15 program or better. And these last couple of years, they finished in the top 10. So this is an elite program. They just are now trying to get over that hump of cementing themselves as an elite program with the national championship. Kind of the similar issue that Dabo Swinney had when he was in his earlier days at Clemson, when he had Taj Boyd, then he got Deshaun Watson. That's when he got his first taste of championship success. And then once the floodgates just opened and Clemson established themselves as premier program in college football. And even without a national title, I still consider Oregon a premier program in college football. They played in a bunch of New Year's Six Bowl games. They always are in some of the biggest games of the year. But I guess for a lot of people, they don't really respect Oregon as much as giving them that premier label until they're able to justify that with hoisting that championship trophy. And I believe within either this year or the next 4 or 5 years, Oregon will eventually get them one. Dan Lanning is too good of a coach not to win a national championship anytime soon with how well they are recruiting. The fact that they're bringing in some of their deepest position groups in program history. And you got a really dedicated NIL donor in Phil Knight that's willing to cut as many checks as necessary to help you accomplish that goal. There's no reason why anybody should be forgetting about Oregon and their chances of winning it all this season. I'm not trying to be disrespectful with what I'm about to say. I understand that football is a team sport. One player is not solely responsible for how successful a team is. But with how bad Michigan's quarterback play was last season, pretty much playing musical chairs with this position, Bryce Underwood is the only Michigan player that matters this year in terms of his play impacting how far this team can go this year. If Bryce Underwood is average or above average, Michigan can find themselves right back in the mix, competing for the Big Ten championship and possibly getting back to the CFP. And there's a lot of pressure and high expectations on Bryce Underwood. They paid a lot of money to get him to flip from LSU. He is tied with Rashawn Gary for being the highest commit in Michigan football history. And he is the only true freshman to ever be featured on the cover of the college football video game. So a lot is expected out of Bryce Underwood. The good thing is they don't need this kid to be Superman. They have done a really good job of making the right moves in the offseason to support him, to make sure that he doesn't have to put that cape on for them to be good this year. You hired offensive coordinator Chip Lindsey, who has a lot of experience as a play caller. He has called plays for 12 years on offense. And 9 out of 12 of those seasons, his offenses have averaged at least 30 points per game. That's a really good resume. And the last good quarterback that he worked with was Drake May, who looked really good his first season in the NFL. And you also got Justice Haynes out of the transfer portal. And with Michigan being a run-first team, that takes a lot of the burden off Bryce Underwood to be good right out the gate. They don't need this guy to play at a Heisman level. And I think it's unreasonable to expect him to be that good this early when there are going to be some growing pains with him. But with the size he has, 6'4", 208 pounds at only 17 years old, he'll turn 18 right at the start of the season. With the missile that he has for a right arm and him just being big as hell, he has the size and he has the skill set to be really productive and possibly be the best true freshman that college football has seen in a very long time. With him having the experienced offensive line protecting him, you have a really good defense. Although Michigan has some really tough games, he's going to get tested early on, going up against Oklahoma on the road and Norman, a hostile environment. My bad, I had a fly into my mouth, but yeah, he's going to be going on the road into a hostile environment with Brent Venables, one of the best defensive minds in college football, who is going to give him a difficult time. You got to go up against Nebraska, USC, Ohio State. You know, Michigan doesn't need for Bryce Underwood to be phenomenal. All they need for him to do is be serviceable. And that's more than good enough, considering that Michigan was in a handful of games that they played in last year, despite pretty much going into every game with their hands tied behind their backs. That's what happens when you have bad quarterback play. And with Bryce Underwood, with his talent level and with the run game that Michigan is going to have, if you can just get a few big plays out of him, like 4 or 5 a game, that can be good enough for you to win at least 9 games. Now, if he ends up playing at above average level and he's up to par with how DJ Lagway looked when he took over as Florida's starting quarterback last year, this can get you back to the Big Ten championship. Michigan is top 10 in returning starters this year. They returned a lot on defense. They got a lot of depth at several positions. Same on offense. The receivers, I'm not really that high on, but it's not like they're bad. It's just they could be a lot better. But with Michigan, when you run the football as much as them, You don't really need a lot of elite receivers. And just with the run-first mentality that this program has, you really don't need much out of Bryce Underwood, but to just make the necessary throws when needed. And that's good enough for you to win the majority of your games this year. Nebraska and USC, they're not as good up front as what you are. Ohio State, yeah, they may have a talent advantage over you on paper, but for some reason, you just have a mentality advantage over Ohio State to where this team just doesn't know how to beat you. So despite having a true freshman quarterback this year, if Bryce Underwood ends up being solid or serviceable for the Michigan Wolverines this year, I think they could find themselves right back in the Big Ten championship game. And, you know, with Bryce Underwood, I really don't think that he has to be all world for Michigan to be good this year. I really don't. And if he ends up hitting the ground running out the gate and he exceeds expectations, then look out. Maybe we could see Michigan competing for the national championship again. Going into every season, we always ask the same question repeatedly year after year when it comes to Miami. Is this the year that the U is finally back? Can they finally build off success? Because since the early 90s and the early 2000s, Miami has been unable to build off successful seasons. When you look at their last couple of head coaches since Larry Coker, it's been the same rinse, wash, and repeat cycle. You'll have a year when you win 9-10 games, and then you regress the year after. Randy Shannon went 9-4 in 2009, and then he followed that up with the 7-5 campaign the year after. Al Golden, when he took over, he went 9-4 in 2013. You would have thought that things were trending up for this program, just for them to go 6-7 the year after. Then Mark Richt comes in, and Mark Richt came really close to being able to build off of a successful season. He went 9-4 in 2016, his first season. He won 10 games in 2017, lost in the ACC championship to Clemson. You were in the college football playoff rankings for a good majority of the year up until you lost to Pitt, and then the wheels just fell off in the title game against Clemson. And then right after that, Miami, they followed that up with a 7-6 campaign. Mark Richt steps down, and then in comes Manny Diaz, who at one point, you know, he had the U looking pretty good. 8-3 during the COVID year, but then right after that, you didn't see no progress. It was 7-5, and then he gets replaced for Mario Cristobal. And Mario Cristobal had his most successful season up to this point as Miami's head coach, winning 10 games in 2024. He helped Cam Ward become the first overall pick of the draft. He was a Heisman finalist. But how successful Miami is this season is going to come down to if Mario can lead this program to that next step. Are you going to be able to be in the ACC championship game? Are you going to be a college football playoff team this year? That's what that next step is for the Miami Hurricanes. That's what a successful season for this program will look like in 2025. These last couple of head coaches that this program has been through, they always peak and then they come right back down to reality. It's the new reality for Miami football. Actually, this team being on the national championship stage, are they actually going to be able to win this conference for the first time since they first entered? For as many years as Miami has been in the ACC, it still surprises me that they have yet to win at least once a conference title. That's what Miami has to do this season. That's what I would define as success for Miami. Even if you don't win the ACC, you want to see positive progression in the win column. I don't want to see a year where Mario Cristobal's bad clock management cost Miami games. You got the defense right with the hiring of Corey Heatherman, and you investing a lot of money into revamping this secondary. You have Carson Beck, who isn't Cam Ward, but the drop-off shouldn't be too bad. And if he plays well coming off that elbow injury, he should be right back in contention to be a first-round pick again, which makes Miami look even better, not just for recruits, but also for other quarterbacks in the transfer portal who can now view Miami as transfer portal U when it comes to QBs. You come to Miami, you ball out with the tailor-made situation, good receivers, a good offensive line, a really good OC and Shannon Dawson, and that can help boost up your draft stock. This season for Miami is a turning point for Mario Cristobal. If this program truly has found the way to break that ceiling and kick that door down, this is truly going to be the year that defines if Miami is going to be back and if they will ever be back. Maybe Miami fans have to come to a realization that this program is never going to be better than 10 wins max. Even with the amount of resources that you have, the amount of NIL money that you have to spend, maybe you're never going to be better than a 10-win team. Now, of course, you can say that always comes down to having the right head coach, which I would agree. But is Miami ever going to be able to hire the right head coach? Who knows? But this season is going to tell us a lot about Mario Cristobal and the direction that this program is heading, which the only path is forward. They say progress isn't always linear. Well, it has to be for Miami this year. There is no going back, because if you do, then you essentially will be repeating the same cycle that you've had out of your last 4 or 5 coaches. You need to see progression out of this program. Miami has to stop living off the 90s and the 2000s nostalgia. It is 2025. It's been 25 years and counting since Miami has really been viewed as a national title contender. And despite the amount of talent that they have, they still haven't separated the gap in the eyes of odds makers in Vegas when it comes to them and the rest of this conference outside of Clemson. They still are viewed in a box that they shouldn't be viewed in based off everything that they have from recruiting, an NIL standpoint. Miami should be way better than the results we've seen out of this team over the last decade. And Mario Cristobal, if he can finally get Miami past that point and they can actually build off that 10-win season, win 11 games, even if they don't make it to the conference championship, let's say they suffer a loss late season and that ultimately keeps them from making it to the ACC championship. If they can get into the playoffs, it changes the perception about Miami football moving forward, because now you're finally in the playoffs. It shows people that you no longer are just nostalgia. You actually have the ability to live up to expectation. You're not just all hype. And eventually, I feel that moment should come from Miami. They were saying that Texas would never be back, and they hired Steve Sarkisian, and boom, they're national title contenders again. Is Mario Cristobal that coach? This season is going to give us the answer to that question. Texas versus Ohio State is college football's biggest week 1 matchup this year. Texas is getting called pussies for declining Ohio State's offer to move this game from its noon Saturday kickoff time to Sunday prime time. And I don't get how you can get mad at Texas for not taking Ohio State up on that offer. It already is hard enough as it is to beat anybody on the road in college football. It's even more tougher to beat Ohio State when they're playing in Columbus. It wouldn't do anything but put Texas at an even bigger disadvantage by moving this game from noon to primetime Sunday night, giving Ohio State a nighttime atmosphere. It just doesn't make a lot of sense for Texas to go through with that. So I don't get why they're getting the backlash that they currently are receiving for making that decision when they're just trying to give themselves a fair shot to win in one of college football's toughest places to get a win at. And this is a rematch of 1 out of 2 of the CFP semifinals from this past season. And this was a game that was neck and neck up until the final 6 minutes when you had some bad and questionable red zone play calling from Steve Sarkisian. Then you had a Jack Sawyer scoop and score, which ultimately broke this game wide open. Texas is the consensus favorite to win it all this year. And if they win this game, you feel really confident about their chances of pulling that off. Meanwhile, you have an Ohio State team that's eyeing the illustrious back-to-back, something that only 2 programs have done and over the last 15 years, that being Alabama with Nick Saban and recently Georgia when they went back-to-back in 2021 and 2022. Ohio State has the talent to do that. They don't rebuild, they reload. When you are an elite program like Ohio State and even Texas, it doesn't matter how many good players you lose to the NFL. You are a football factory. You lose good guys to the NFL and you bring in more NFL caliber players, whether that be via recruiting or through the transfer portal. You don't worry about what Ohio State loses, especially when you return 2 of the best players in college football, that being Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs. Now, I am interested mainly in this game because of Arch Manning. He has been getting a lot of hype. He's a Heisman frontrunner. Of course, we know about the heritage of the Manning last name from Archie, Eli, and Peyton. The bloodlines run deep with Arch Manning. And if he ends up balling out in this game against Ohio State, he's going to be the Heisman frontrunner for the entirety of the season. This is going to be the game that sets the tone for him. Now, if he struggles, then you're going to start hearing a lot of chatter around Arch Manning. Is he overrated? Was he overhyped? Remember, when Texas went into the playoffs last year after that SEC title loss to Georgia, there was a lot of chatter around Quinn Ewers getting benched in favor of Arch Manning. And there's a good majority of folks out there that would tell you that if Arch Manning started during that playoff run over Quinn Ewers, Texas' destiny would have been a lot different. Now, we don't know the truth to that because we can't live off hypotheticals. But, you know, if Arch Manning ends up balling out in this game against a really good Ohio State defense on paper, maybe that further adds some more fuel to that hypothetical what if. Now, Julian saying he is going to be debuting for the first time ever as Ohio State starting quarterback. You got Arch Manning making his official debut, although he appeared in a few games last year when Quinn Ewers got injured. This is his first big-time game ever. And same thing can be said for Julian Sayin. Now, Julian Sayin is pretty much fresh blood out there. He hasn't started any game up to this point. He was a former 5-star coming out of high school. He initially committed to play for Nick Saban in Alabama. When he retired, he transferred to Ohio State. He sat behind Will Howard for all of last season. Now it's his turn to take over the reins. And I believe that Julian Sayin is really good. He has the same chances of winning the Heisman as what Arch Manning does. But with Arch Manning, this game shows us a lot about what we're going to learn moving forward about how good Julian Sayin is going to be. Ohio State is accustomed to getting good quarterback play in these big-time games. There haven't really been too many games where the quarterback play was the reason why Ohio State lost. And if Julian Sayin struggles in this game against what should be a really good Texas defense, maybe you start having some chatter about maybe a quarterback change taking place, or maybe you start second guessing your decision to start Julian Sayin over the other guy if you're Ryan Day. Steve Sarkisian versus Matt Patricia. Steve Sarkisian, in my opinion, is the best play caller in college football at the moment. And Matt Patricia is going to be coaching in his first ever game as Ohio State's new defensive coordinator replacing Jim Knowles. Now, Matt Patricia, for those of you guys who aren't familiar with the NFL, he was Bill Belichick's right-hand man during the prime years of the New England Patriots dynasty. He was the architect behind some of those all-time great defenses that the Patriots had. And the issue with Matt Patricia is that sometimes those defenses didn't always play up to an elite level. And at Ohio State, even though you got a lot of talent, are you going to be able to have the amount of success that Jim Knowles has had with this program the last couple of years? When you're going up against a premier play caller, what should be one of the best, if not the best quarterback in college football, this is going to be a challenging debut for Matt Patricia. But if he ends up doing a really phenomenal job with this defense and they hold Texas to under 20 points, you feel really good about the transition from Jim Knowles to him. And I think Matt Patricia should fare really well as Ohio State's defensive coordinator. When you have the amount of talent that Ohio State has on the D-line and in the secondary, especially when you have a guy like Caleb Downs, you got to be a novice as a defensive play caller to not at least have a top 20 defense this year. But this is going to be a really great game that I'm looking forward to. And I feel if I had to make a prediction right now, I would take Texas to win this game. Steve Sarkisian is really good when it comes to having his team prepared to win tough games on the road. Even some of the closer games that they had on the road last year, they were finally able to squeak out wins in. Ohio State, I still don't think that a loss in this game is fully going to determine how good they will be. I don't think it'll hurt their playoff chances. Ryan Day has never had more than 2 losses during the regular season. If anything, it further adds fuel to the fire for Ohio State this year. And I think that there's nothing wrong with having the early loss to start the season. It gives you some film to actually look back upon, to actually make some improvements, figure out what you need to make adjustments at, versus just opening the season playing a random FCS team like a Bishop Sycamore or Streamers University. So this should be a really fun game. I'll take Texas to win. 2017 is going to be my final score prediction. Conference realignment has made the SEC and the Big Ten the big evil villains of college football. The Big Ten ultimately was responsible for the death of the Pac-12, and the SEC took away Texas and Oklahoma from the Big 12, which pretty much put that conference on life support. And I believe over the span of 2-3 years from now, we will see the formation of college football Super League, where you have the Big 12, the Big 10, the SEC, all combining to make college football Super League, which would be the equivalent to the AFC, NFC, and the NFL. And a lot of people don't like the current state that college football is in, and they blame the SEC and the Big Ten for college football being the way that it is right now. But I disagree with that. I don't put the blame solely on the SEC and the Big Ten for making college football what it is at the moment. I feel a particular network is responsible for the mess that college sports is, which is the Longhorn Network. And if you guys don't remember what the Longhorn Network is, it was originally created back in 2011. It was a network solely dedicated to covering and broadcasting Texas sports. They broadcasted a few football, basketball games, a couple of their winter and Olympic sports. And at the time, the Longhorn Network was created because Big 12 members couldn't come to an agreement on a conference network. You know how we currently have the SEC network, the ACC network, the Big 10 network. Well, the Big 12 members at the time were unable to agree on making one. And the way they did their media rights deal is a lot different from how media rights deals are done today. Today, media rights deal, you normally see conferences distribute the revenue equally among their teams. Well, the way the Big 12 did is that not everybody got the same slice of the pie. You see, they would do their media rights deal in tiers. Their tier 1, they would sell off their high-profile games, like your big rivalries such as OU versus Texas. You would sell those off to the big networks like CBS, ESPN, Fox, and then you'll have your tier 2 games, which would be your games that have a less national appeal compared to your high-profile Big 12 games, such as if Texas Tech played Baylor, that would be a tier 2 game. And those games will be sold to your regional networks, such as the CW. You know how sometimes you'll see an ACC game on the CW17? That would count as a tier 2 game. And occasionally you will see these games also on ESPNU, ESPN2, and then you'll have your third tier, which was your low-profile games. Like if Texas played Bishop Sycamore, that would be a tier 3 game. And what the Big 12 did at the time with their media rights deal is that they would sell off the tier 1 and tier 2 games, but the tier 3 games, they would allow every team to individually sell them off with whoever to get additional revenue for themselves. They didn't have to share this with the rest of the conference. And with Texas being the big brand that they were at the time, they were able to get a more favorable tier 3 deal than what any other team in the conference was capable of, due to them being a national contender at the time, the biggest brand in the sport at the moment, and ESPN through a 20-year deal worth $300 million at Texas to acquire their tier 3 rights. And at the time, this was a very lucrative deal. It was paying Texas $15 million per season. And the reason why ESPN threw so much money at Texas for the Longhorn Network was mainly due to not wanting to see the Longhorns leave the Big 12 for the Pac-10, the Pac-12 at the time. Because at that moment, back in 2011, Fox had the media rights deal with the Pac-12. And you will lose the biggest brand in college football to where you had USC, Oregon, and a bunch of other big West Coast brands at the time to your biggest competitor. And ESPN didn't want that to happen. So they gave Texas an offer that they couldn't refuse. And of course, Texas would have been stupid not to take it. Plus, Texas and Oklahoma were the king and prince of the Big 12. They ran this conference. There wouldn't be no Big 12 without these two teams. So, to keep Texas happy and to further keep them from leaving the Big 12, they say, you know what? You want the Longhorn Network? We will allow you to have it, even though the other teams in the Big 12 at the time were against the Longhorn Network for several reasons that we will get into. And why the Longhorn Network pissed off a lot of members of the Big 12 is because it showed favoritism to Texas, and plus it further showed the instability of what the Big 12 was because of how unevenly distributed the television media rights deal were. You see, at the time, you know, they didn't really have even distribution when it came to their media rights deal, like how we have now with the SEC. Every SEC team gets the same even amount, even if you're Vanderbilt. Same thing with the Big 10, now the Big 12. But at that time, when you had the four big members of the Big 12 come together, they all agreed on this distribution model, and they agreed that Texas and OU will get the most of the revenue share. But eventually, over time, people grew to not like this, and that's when you saw Nebraska and Colorado leave. Now, they didn't leave because of Longhorn Network. They were already out the door a long time before the Longhorn Network took place. They were already looking to get out. But the Longhorn Network is the main reason why Texas A&M and Missouri did from the Big 12 to join the SEC. A&M didn't like the fact that their biggest rival had more exposure than what they did. And also, they were getting a larger slice of the pie than what they were. And not only did this piss off A&M and Missouri, but it also hurt the rest of this conference ability to get a respectable media rights deal with Texas commanding so much of the pie. And not only did it hurt the Big 12 having the Longhorn Network when it came to negotiating a media rights deal that would appease all of its members, but they struggled to expand and add more members. Because why would you want to join a conference that's so unstable, that has a unfair pay model where you have one team getting more than the other? Nobody would want to join a conference in that situation unless you were a really high-level G5 at the time, which is what allowed them to add TCU and West Virginia. But because of the Longhorn Network, the Big 12 didn't really benefit from this. Texas got all of the benefits from it. Everybody else kind of suffered from it because they weren't able to get more money. Now, you can say, well, JT, everybody had the ability to sell their Tier 3 rights. That is true, but not everybody is willing to pay the same price for your Tier 3 rights as what they were with Texas. When you're just such a big brand like that, of course, ESPN and other networks are going to want to throw more money at it. So therefore, when the Pac-12 had the ability to add both Texas and Oklahoma, they turned it down because initially USC's athletic director, or their president at the time, in front of the cameras, he seemed like he was all for adding both Texas and OU. But behind the scenes, he didn't give them the vote for the move to take place. And the Pac-12 commissioner, Larry Scott, at that moment, didn't really want to add them because the Longhorn Network would have interfered with the Pac-12 trying to build their regional networks. They wanted to have a few networks of their own for different regions to broadcast their sporting events. And adding Texas also would have meant that they would have had to get a bigger slice of the pie because it's Texas, damn it. You know what they say about Texas. Everything is bigger in Texas. So therefore, Texas being the powerhouse that they are, they had so much pull that if they joined your conference, you kind of had to eat your ego and get them a larger slice of the pie because of what they were bringing in. And also, it would have been a domino effect. You get Texas, you get Oklahoma. You also would have gotten Oklahoma State and Texas Tech, who would have followed suit, and that essentially would have killed the Big 12. And if the Pac-12 would have allowed Texas to have the Longhorn Network, it would have made the Pac-12 the first big super conference of college football at that time. Now, would they have been as big as what the SEC is? Maybe. Washington has a pretty big fan base. Oregon does as well. You got USC. We know what they bring to the table. You add Texas and Oklahoma alongside of that. You know, the other schools that followed, Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, they just would have been added meat to the bones. That would have helped keep the Pac-12 alive. But since Texas had the Longhorn Network, the Pac-12 was just like, nah, we're good off that. And since they didn't add them, eventually down the road, when Texas and OU did from the Big 12 to the SEC, that essentially was the domino effect that led to the downfall of the Pac-12. Because, you know, when one team goes on the attack, you have to react. And with the SEC adding OU and Texas, the Big Ten had to make some conference realignment moves in their own right, which included poaching USC, UCLA, UW, and Oregon from the Pac-12. And USC was to the Pac-12 what Texas was to the Big 12 at the time. They were the heart and soul of that conference. When you lose USC, you pretty much lost the entirety of the Pac-12, and that ultimately is what happened. And this is the domino effect from the Longhorn Network. But not only did the Longhorn Network hurt the Pac-12 in the sense of they didn't want to add them because of it, but it also hurt the Big 12 because when you lost Texas and Oklahoma, instead of you being able to retroactively add teams, which a lot of members were saying, hey, like, this network isn't good for the conference. It's holding us back from adding more teams. So because of that, it held back how good you could have been, and the Big 12 could have been in a more advantageous situation now than what they were when they lost Oklahoma and Texas if the Longhorn Network was never created. So you see the uneven distribution of money from the Longhorn Network and how the Big 12 did their media rights deal was a large reason why all the teams in this conference were so unhappy and why you saw so many teams leaving. But if you didn't have it, or if the Pac-12 was willing to find a way to just make do with it, what the Pac-12 could have done is they get Texas, they get the Longhorn Network. Yeah, there would have been some legalities that they had to solve between ESPN and whatnot, but they could have turned the Longhorn Network into one of their regional Pac-12 networks. And ultimately, not adding Texas and Oklahoma because of this network is what led to its collapse, because you couldn't make the first super conference. And once you had OU and Texas leave, why would OU and Texas leave when the network was so profitable for Texas, JT? Well, although the Longhorn Network benefited Texas, the SEC just had way too much money on the table for Texas to turn down. That's why you now see the Longhorn Network defunct. And the Big Ten, by poaching the top 4 teams out of Pac-12 and the remainder of that, leaving for the Big 12, they got the scraps, and the ACC got the crumbs. The Pac-12 is in the position that it's in today. So essentially, it's not the Big Ten and the SEC solely, poaching teams from other conferences that got college football into this state. It's the Longhorn Network. So essentially, you can say that the Longhorn Network broke college football, because it did. And I know you Texas fans are going to feel like this is a sly on you. I'm not hating on you. This is really just my opinion. I feel the Longhorn Network only benefited Texas, and it put the rest of the conference at a disadvantage. And it hurt the Pac-12, because if they didn't have the Longhorn Network, the Pac-12 for Larry Scott more than likely would have took Texas and OU, and the Pac-12 would have never collapsed, because the media rights deal would have been good enough to appease everybody, to where Texas and Oklahoma never felt the need to leave for more money and join the SEC. The SEC wouldn't have the monopoly over the sport that it has right now. The Big Ten would still have been the second most powerful conference, but they wouldn't have had the superpower of a team and a school as storied with the history that USC has. So this is why I believe the Longhorn Network broke college football. I'm eager to know you guys' thoughts on this down in the comment section down below.